Hey my students, how you doing? Hope you having good day. In this video, I am gonna talk about part 2 of What If Deku was Erasehead's son and had all for one. We will see what changes in his life. Watch till end. And subscribe for more, also like this video, it helps me to stay motivated. And thanks to the author of this story, this video is possible. So do check it out and show some love. Name of this fanfic is Ghosts from the Past by Ain33mon. So do check out the author of this story and check out entire work. Also if you have any complaints about videos, feel free to comment, I will try to improve them. Let's jump in video. When Izuku and Hitachi reach UA the next morning, the gates are swarming with press. After seeing this morning's headlines on various news sites, Izuku can't say he understands. Because apparently All Might is teaching at UA this year. What is even worse is that he is teaching heroics. Which means that Izuku will almost certainly have the number one hero as a teacher for those classes. Now, as a hero, Izuku doesn't have immense problems with All Might. He has saved a lot of people and stabilized a country, there's no doubt about that. But he's not Izuku's favorite hero. He hasn't been a hero fanboy like he used to be for years, and since then Izuku's developed a taste for heroes that are a bit less flashy and a bit more quiet. He didn't like All Might at all. Izuku remembers he wasn't allowed any hero merch at all, but especially not any All Might merch, back when he didn't yet know what kind of monster he was. He remembers being severely upset about that, mostly because his favorite hoodie had been a limited edition All Might hoodie. Probably the second reason why Izuku doesn't exactly have warm feelings about the number one is because of family reasons. Mainly that he had a 2 centuries old grudge with All Might and anyone before him who was the bearer of one very specific quirk. Izuku's heard that tale more times than he can count, though probably a heavily censored version where half of the material was used to manipulate Izuku. He knows how badly he wants All Might's quirk, it had been made his number one goal. A few years ago he had almost succeeded in doing so. Afterwards Izuku hadn't seen him for a few months, when he did appear it was while on heavy life support, still just as terrifying. Because Izuku knows it's not the quirks, but the mind that make him the king of the underworld. Do you think they hope to get some information by kidnapping the students? Izuku gets dragged out of the depths of his mind by Hitachi's question. Just ahead of them the huge sea of press seems to absorb student after student with their endless cameras and microphones. It almost appears to be a living organism, ready to drag in anything that comes too close, never to be seen again. The thought enters Izuku's brain. I'm not going in there. Even the idea of doing so makes his hands sweaty and his breathing ragged. Hitachi must see something on his face because suddenly he stops. I'm sure there must be a back entrance somewhere. He looks around with a tense face, wearily eyeing the bulk of press. They're still far enough away that nobody has caught sight of them yet. Come on. I think I know where to find another way in. Izuku grabs Hitachi's wrist and ushers him into the nearest alley. What? Hitachi muttered with a confused face. Izuku quickly checks their surroundings while explaining, they haven't seen us yet, so it's best to get off the main street. He quickly maps out a potential route to the back entrance in his head. He'd examined UA's surrounding area extensively just before the entrance exam. It never hurts to know one's way around a place. When he's sure of a route he starts to make his way deeper into the maze of streets and alleys surrounding UA, Hitachi following him with an indifferent shrug. As they're hurrying along one of the streets Hitachi asks, "Sue, what was up between you and that Bakugo kid yesterday?" Izuku sighs, Bakugo hasn't left his mind since yesterday. To be honest, he doesn't really know what to do regarding his long-lost childhood friend. Act like he doesn't exist. Play ignorant. Izuku's pretty sure that would just anger Bakugo, and it would most likely make him more determined to figure out who exactly Izuku is. On the other hand, he can't just tell Bakugo that yes, Izuku's his childhood friend. Yes, he disappeared at some point, and yes, that is because of his evil grandfather. It's a difficult predicament to be in, and to be honest, Izuku really just feels like ignoring Bakugo until he's figured out how to deal with the explosive teen. I don't really know. He thought he knew me. Hitachi spares Izuku a searching glance, and does he? Izuku hesitates and his friend can see it on his face. Then he shrugs. Even if he knew me in the past, I'm not that person anymore. So no, I guess he doesn't know me. Hitachi lets his eyes linger a bit longer on Izuku before wordlessly nodding. His friend probably knows that something is up with Izuku. Not probably, he definitely knows. Especially because when Izuku had just started middle school, he didn't know how to properly socially interact with other kids at all. Hitachi has also seen the scars that litter his body enough times in the changing room before PE. It makes it not too difficult to form a vague picture in one's mind about Izuku's past circumstances. But his friend never seemed to care. When Izuku had made clear that he didn't really care about Hitachi's supposed villainous quirk, his friend had patiently shown him what real teenager life was like. He'd shown him the arcade, pop culture and many other things that Izuku just wasn't familiar with because he'd never had access to them. Itachi has never pressed for any details about Izuku's past, he's never cared about Izuku's quirk. And for all of that Izuku is immensely grateful. In return Izuku also never presses for details when Hitachi has a rough day, just giving him silent support. They have a quiet understanding between the two of them, they don't judge one another when someone keeps some details back, knowing that when the time is right, they'll be told about the details. The rest of the way they spend in comfortable silence. As expected no one's at the back entrance, save for a few other smart students and Hitachi and Izuku are one of the first few to arrive from their class. The morning passes as normal. They have various regular classes, all of them Izuku's able to follow with ease. He's always liked to study, it takes his mind off other things. Then lunch rolls around and surprisingly enough Itachi and Izuku aren't sitting alone at a table. Soon after taking place at a table somewhere in the corner of the cafeteria, Uraraka sits down next to them with Iida and the frog girl named Asui in tow. Izuku and Hitachi introduce themselves to Asui, she answers with a, "Call me Tsu, Ribbit." After that Uraraka strikes up friendly conversation, mostly with Tsu and Iida. Izuku sometimes makes a remark when they're talking about a teacher or a subject but is more distracted by a gaze from across the room. The blazing red eyes from Bakugo who's sitting at the other end of the room with Kirishima and a few others. He doesn't even seem to notice that his group is having a conversation, he just stares at Izuku with an angry frown. For a split second Izuku turns to answer the gaze with his own stare, letting his eyes darken a little. Bakugo freezes before turning away, fury radiating from him because he got caught. With a satisfied smile Izuku focuses again on what the people at his table are talking about. "Do you think we'll have All Might for heroics, Kiro?" It's Tsu who pops the question that's been on everyone's mind this morning. Hitachi shrugs as he stirs his coffee, why would they? We're the newbies of the school. But it would be so cool to have the number one hero as our teacher. Uraraka says as she waves her chopsticks around enthusiastically. At the same time Iida looks at her with a horrified expression. "Uraraka, please refrain from waving your chopsticks around. It is improper." "Oops, sorry." Uraraka giggles as she keeps waving them around. Iida gives her one last glance before pushing up his glasses and saying, "Personally I think that All Might will be teaching the upper classes. They would probably benefit from his expertise the most while we still have to learn the basics, something any heroic teacher can't teach us. I think there's a big chance we'll get him as our teacher." All eyes turn to Izuku as this is the first thing he said since the start of the break. Iida frowns, why would that be? Izuku is just about to elaborate when all of a sudden a screeching alarm blares through the room. It's so loud that for a few seconds all Izuku can hear is a piercing sound in his ears until he manages to drag his hearing quirk into one of the saves of his main quirk. The rest of the table is looking around with confused or scared faces when a voice from one of the speakers sounds. "This is a level 3 evacuation. Please evacuate orderly." It's as if that's what releases all the tension in the room because all of a sudden the entire student mass is hurrying towards the emergency exit. Another first-year student yells something at Iida when he asks a question, but Izuku doesn't hear what exactly above the ringing in his ears, this time not because of the noise, but because of the waves and waves of bodies all moving towards the exit. It seems like it blurs together into one crushing wave that absorbs anything that comes near, and something in Izuku's brain tells him that going in there is a bad idea. The rest of their group at the table all get up in a flurry of movements, and then Iida is herding them towards the mass of people. It's as if Izuku's feet are made of lead because he can't step away from the table. Other students rush past him, and all noise seems to blur together as Iida, Uraraka and Tsu head towards the exit. Then Hitachi is at his side with a worried face. "Come on, let's keep by each other's side." He grabs Izuku's hand, his are clammy from sweat as well, and then he begins guiding Izuku in the direction of the mob of people. Once they've reached the mob of people, with the alarm still blaring in their ears and with a firm grip on each other's hand, Hitachi starts pushing his way through. After a few deep breaths Izuku follows him in the action. The sound of people screaming and panicking is almost overwhelming, and Izuku's head threatens to split apart by the sheer amount of quirks packed together, all a breath away of being taken. It takes a lot of effort, nearly too much, to keep his quirk in the itch to take in check. Itachi also doesn't look too good, his face is even more pale than usual, making his eye bag stand out like black against white. His purple quirk is pulsating in rapid, uneven movements. With a spurt of courage Izuku begins pushing even harder. His friend is not comfortable in the situation and it urges Izuku to do something about it. He grits his teeth together and ignores the splitting headache and the feeling of bodies being pushed against his own. All of it goes well and Izuku gets the feeling like he might be able to overcome this crowd together with his friend. Of course that's when someone screams, "They broke through the gate." There's a beat of silence. Then all hell breaks loose. The pressure of bodies against Izuku's increases and in one swift motion his and Hitashi's hand are wrenched apart. His friend looks one more time at Izuku with a panicked face and his lips move to form words before he's swept away. Izuku doesn't hear the words, only the screeching of the alarm that's way to load and blood rushing in his ears. Shoulders shove against him, feet step on his own, and elbows jab in his side. There are too many people around him and Izuku feels like he's drowning. The waves push against him, drag him down until he's unable to breathe, the world spins. Izuku's not sure how, but he manages to reach the windows lining the right side of the hall and the view of the sky, and the school grounds manages to calm him down. Oxygen flows back into his lungs and the ringing in his ears tones down a little. From this hallway he has a clear view of the gates and he sees reporters attempting to enter the school grounds while President Mick and some other heroes rush to stop them from entering the grounds. A sense of relief floods Izuku because these aren't villains, they're just annoying reporters. That is until his eyes fall on the gate. Or rather what is left of it. Because even from this distance he recognizes the decay that ate away at UA's unbreakable barrier until only dust and rust were left. Tenko? It can't be. Surely it's just a similar quirk. Izuku tries to convince himself of that, but his mind won't let him. It's Tenko and he's here on a mission for him. They're here to take him. They found him. Where could Tenko be? Izuku doesn't know. He has to get out of here. But before he can take any action the world narrows down. All noise becomes too loud and not there at all at the same time. With shaking knees Izuku lets himself lean against the window, his breaths coming in short and shallow. Somewhere in the back of his head he registers a vaguely familiar voice booming something from far above the crowd. Then rough, calloused hands close around his wrist and drag him away from the crowd. It seems like the students aren't packed together as densely anymore, but Izuku's too busy trying to breathe while staying on 2 feet to notice. Everything is a blur of color and noise until the calloused hands drag him into a cool, silent room. They push him down against a tiled wall, and the white stone feels cool under Izuku's touch. Still, it does nothing against the panic that's coursing through Izuku's veins. The world is still a haze of color, and his breathing is too loud in his ears. Tenko is here. He broke into UA and no one knows. Tenko is H. Izuku croaks out in between heaving breaths. Those rough hands close around his shoulder and a vague blur comes in closer. Hey. Save your fucking breath. No. They don't understand. They have to. Izuku shakes his head fiercely and he squeezes his shaking hands together in front of his knees. And no they're going to take me. I don't care right now. Just follow my breathing, dipshit. One of Izuku's hands is grabbed and put on what must be a chest. At the same time a wave of nausea hits Izuku that he swallows away with a lot of effort. Then the person starts counting to 5 as they breathe in and again as they breathe out. Izuku tries to follow what the voice is saying and slowly, so very slowly his breathing calms down again. The rapid beating of his heart slows and everything stops spinning. Finally the world comes back into focus. And with that Izuku finds no one other than Bakugo sitting in front of him with blazing red eyes and a firm set of his mouth. Shouda is enjoying some well-needed rest inside his yellow sleeping bag when the alarm goes off. In seconds he is on 2 feet and out of his classroom, the safety protocol for this specific alarm a level 3 evacuation ready in his head. The second and third years still have classes, they always start their lunch 30 minutes later so as not to overwhelm lunch rush. So those classes will be with a teacher and will also know what to do because of the regular evacuation practices. No, it's the first years he's worried about. They haven't had any evacuation practice and in his experience are generally not as cool-headed about these things. Still, Shouda has his own things to do and so he goes off to check multiple back entrances and classrooms to make sure everything's empty with his capture weapon in his hands and his quirk ready to use. Level 3 evacuation hasn't happened in all his years of teaching here and thus an uneasy feeling settles in his stomach. He squashes the feeling quickly, it wouldn't be logical to be distracted by that now. Keeping a clear head is much more important. He doesn't encounter anything besides empty classrooms or sometimes a class following one of his colleagues on their way to evacuate. He also doesn't hear any upheaval from nearby and it's almost unsettling because with a level 3 alarm there should have been some serious shit happening somewhere. It doesn't make sense. There's not much Shouda can do about that now though, so he continues on with his part of the evacuation. After a few minutes he finishes and he heads outside to the wide open grass fields where all the classes are neatly lined up. A quick chat with Midnight tells him that it was just the press who had broken in. Yamada stayed behind to see them all off and taken away by the police, but also to be on gate duty. Apparently the gate was destroyed. Logically, no reporter would be stupid enough to do that. Though that's not something he can think about now because he has a class to check up on. He finds them standing in a neat line next to the other first-year hero class. When they notice him approaching, Iida is the first to say something. "Sensei. Is everything alright?" It was just the press who broke through the gate. Shouta lets himself scan his class and realizes that two of his students are missing. Where are Midoriya and Bakugo? As he asks, his eyes fall on Shinsu. From what he observed, he is friends with Midoriya. Shinsu meets his eyes with a certain panic in them. I don't know, sensei," he stammers. "I lost Izuku in the crowd. You all stay here. Midnight will bring you back to class." Shouta orders as he looks at his class with a stern look. Anyone who does otherwise will be immediately expelled. Just as he turns around, Shinsu calls, "He doesn't like crowds, sensei." Shouta turns his head around and nods at his student as a sign of acknowledgement. Shinsu lets his shoulder hang just a bit in relief, the only bit of emotion he shows. A clear sign of how little Shinsu trusts authoritarian figures. Shouta knows that some of his students have issues. For Shinsu, probably related to his quirk. Yaoi Rozu has issues with her confidence, Bakugo clearly has anger issues, and Shouta's sure that Todoroki has a lot going on regarding his home situation. Just to put it lightly. And that's not even speaking about Midoriya, who also appears to have a lot going on. That's also putting it lightly. Most of this became clear yesterday during the quirk apprehension test, but as a teacher, Shouta can't just demand of his students to work on their problems or to talk to him about their struggles. It's also not something that he wants to do, for he is their teacher, not their parent. He can merely nudge them in the right direction with some encouragement. For now, Shouta will start by finding his missing students and giving them a firm talk about not following evacuation. As he walks away with big strides, Shouta calls Netsu. "I have 2 missing students. Do you have any idea where they might be? Can you look at your cameras and tell me where they were last seen?" The hum from the phone, "Of course, let me have a look." As Shouta enters the school again, he gets his answer. "You should take a look around the second bathroom near hallway 1C on the first floor." "Alright, thanks." Shouta hangs up and hurries along the hallways to his destination. When he's just about to reach the bathroom, he catches 2 voices. "Drag me in here." "You were having a fucking panic attack, idiot. What else should I have done, huh?" Deciding he's heard enough, Shouta enters the bathroom with the most menacing face that he can muster. There he's greeted by the sight of Bakugo sitting in front of Midoriya with a surprisingly toned down demeanor. The latter is sitting with his knees pulled up to his chin, white as a sheet, and with jittering hands against a tiled wall next to the sinks. The two of them look up to see Shouta standing and the door opening. "Sensei." Midoriya stammers, his voice raw. Shouta feels a sense of shock when he sees the teen's eyes, they look even more haunted than usual. Immediately he lets his ominous expression soften a little. "What happened?" he asks, still with a strict voice but not as harsh. Before Midoriya can say anything, Bakugo responds, "He had a panic attack. I dragged him in here to calm down." Shouta looks at Midoriya with a raised eyebrow. "Do you know why you had one?" The teen seems to hesitate and Shouta adds, "And don't think about lying." "I'll know." "The crowd," Midoriya says with a steady voice as he looks Shouta dead in the eye, "It was the crowd. You should have let us know if crowds are that much of an issue for you." It isn't exactly accusatory, merely a statement. The greenette shakes his head, "I can handle it on my own." Shouta decides to let this discussion rest. The bathroom isn't the right place for it. "Can you stand?" Midoriya nods and stands up with surprising power. "Good. Bakugo, take Midoriya to the infirmary. After that, immediately return to class." The 2 teens leave the bathroom, Shouta gives Midoriya a look, telling him that this conversation isn't over yet. The teen's face remains indifferent and it tells Shouta everything he needs to know. The mask is back again. While making his way to his classroom, he contemplates the headache that is Midoriya. When he first met the teen as Ghost, he tried to keep his distance, they were only colleagues after all, and it was none of Shouta's business what was happening in the other's life. That all changed when Midoriya became a student of his. He'd seen the mask once before, after the entrance exam. He'd come down to the infirmary out of curiosity because he wondered where a teenager had learned to fight like that and with such experience. But it hadn't been a ferocious warrior that Shouta was met with, instead, it had been a scared and quite frankly a traumatized teenager. He'd seen it in the way the teen flinched when recovery girl checked up on him. But especially in the way Midoriya reacted after the panic attack. It had been as if a mask slid over his face as soon as Shouta had started asking about the teen's personal life. All signs for domestic abuse. But when Shouta had asked him, Midoriya had reacted so truthfully opposed to that suggestion that he was sure that wasn't the case. And thus the picture Shouta had crafted in his mind didn't fit. On the first day, Shouta had expected Midoriya to shine during the quirk apprehension test. As Ghost, he was almost famous for being able to be flexible with his mind and think outside the box. And with the sheer ferocity the teen had shown during the entrance exam, Shouta had thought that there was no other option other than Midoriya ending near the top of every test. There had been none of that. Instead, Midoriya had scored average on every single test and had made no effort to raise his scores. So Shouta had decided to intervene. He still doesn't understand why the teen had been so angry when he'd taken his quirk, but it had disappointed him. Because it meant that the teen couldn't accept his quirk being taken. Which quite frankly was ridiculous, as Shouta had never even seen him use his quirk. But Midoriya had surprised him afterwards. With a smart trick that only Ghost could think of, he'd taken the top score during the last test. And now Shouta had found Midoriya together with Bakugo. He isn't even going to dive into that relationship while the teen had just had a panic attack. It is an impossible puzzle. But Shouta is going to figure his student out. There's one thing he knows. There's something going on with Midoriya, something that may be far more sinister than thought, and when the truth is revealed, it's not going to be pretty. Izuku surprised when Bakugo keeps his questions to himself while the two of them make their way to the infirmary. Unlike the blazing anger that seems to permanently hang around the teen, he now seems to be sunken into a brooding silence. Meanwhile, Izuku's quietly panicking. Because after a while of debating, he's sure that it had been Tenko who broke through the gate. And maybe he didn't come here to take Izuku, because if that had been the case, Izuku wouldn't be here now. But there must have been a reason for the break-in. Should he report his suspicions to the school? No. Then he'd have to explain his reasoning, and there's no way Izuku's risking his or his mom's safety. It pains him, but for now there's not much he can do. Izuku glances again at Bakugo, who's walking quietly beside him. He wonders what the teen is thinking. Maybe about those stupid sentences Izuku said back in the bathroom. They arrive at the infirmary and Bakugo hands him over to Recovery Girl before returning back to class. He gives Izuku one final glance before he leaves. Izuku feels a sense of uneasiness growing at the look in his eyes because Bakugo is figuring things out. There's no way he isn't with how smart the other teen is. Recovery Girl gives Izuku a stern lecture about informing the school about potential stress factors. Izuku undergoes the talk quietly. After making sure he's physically alright, the heroine forces him to take an hour rest. Finally, just before the first class of heroics, she lets him go, and Izuku's sure he's never been so happy about returning to class again. When Izuku enters the classroom, he's met with a flurry of questions. After assuring everyone that he's fine and that he'll be able to join the first heroics lesson, he manages to get to his seat. Hitachi, who is sitting behind him, asks, "Are you alright?" Izuku nods, "Yeah, I'm fine now. Just the crowd was a lot." Hitachi hums in understanding, and Izuku can see the worry in him disappear at the assurance that his friend is alright. Before the two of them can talk more, Izuku's quirk seems to go haywire by something nearby. Not even 2 seconds later, the back door is thrown open by no one other than I am coming through the door like a normal person. The entire class erupts into chatter at the appearance of All Might while the man makes his way to the front of the class. Izuku has to do his best to keep a straight face. Annoyance, fear and anger battle to take over his face, and Izuku can't decide what to feel besides the awe at the man's quirk. He's never seen anything like it before, even his quirk couldn't be compared to this. The quirk seems to hold 7 different lights all warped into one, and together they form the most beautiful rainbow Izuku's ever seen. Along with it, the quirk has a blinding white light surrounding its edges, making it by far the brightest quirk in the room. And then he's not even talking about the sheer power that the quirk emits. It's almost baffling that one quirk can hold so much strength. Still, awe isn't the only emotion. There's annoyance and anger. Izuku isn't sure why he feels that way. Maybe that in some twisted way he feels angry for the damage the hero inflicted on him. There's something seriously wrong with him if that's the case. He's also slightly afraid of the number one because he's one of the few people, if not the only person on the planet, to take him on and come out alive. The thought of finding himself under the wrath of All Might if the hero warrior to ever find out who Izuku's related to, what he's done to survive, scares Izuku. The number one breaks Izuku's internal battle by starting the class. "Alright everyone, yes, I am here as a teacher." The class quiets down and All Might continues, "Today we'll be doing a practical exercise. So everyone, take your costumes and follow me to ground beta." With a click on a button, all the costumes are revealed and an excited murmur passes through the class. "Well, come on. We don't have all day." All Might calls with a blinding smile, and that gets the class moving. In the changing room, Izuku takes a moment to look at the silver suitcase that stores his costume. Ever since he was young, he dreamed of wearing an actual hero costume. Back in those sunny days, he designed many costumes, most of them inspired by All Might. Now he'd taken his inspiration elsewhere. When he opens the case, it reveals beautiful, sturdy black fabric and various gadgets. First are black cargo pants with green accents and dark red pockets. The knees are padded and the fabric is strong enough to withstand the wear and tear of battle. Next are black boots up to his calves with steel toes. The top half of his costume is tight-fitted, again sturdy black fabric with green accents and Kevlar protection in the important parts. Around his waist wraps a red utility belt filled to the brim with goodies he'd requested from the support department. His hands are left completely uncovered as to give him enough opportunity to turn others' quirks off. Finally, his face is covered up to the nose by a black mouth guard. All that is left is a black hood. On the half that covers up until low over his forehead some special accents have been added. The mouth and face of a ghost in red have been stitched on the hood and the hood itself ends in a low point of fabric like those covers ghosts tend to wear during Halloween. Whoa man, you're jacked. Izuku turns around to see Kirishima staring at him with a toothy grin. When Izuku looks down he sees that in his hurry of checking out the costume he'd forgotten to put an undershirt on, exposing his torso. Thanks. Next to him Hitachi almost seems to lose it at his awkwardness. Oh, he'll get his friend back for that one. At that moment a red-haired teen appears to realize how rude his comment could come across and his cheeks redden. Sorry, I wasn't staring or anything. I just kinda noticed. And no, it's alright. As if he'd just adopted Iida's mannerisms, Izuku turns around again like a robot planning on putting his shirt on as quickly as possible and getting the hell out of here. Hey, where did you get all those scars? Izuku freezes. The entire room quiets. This time when Izuku turns around it's Kaminari who's looking at him. Oh, and the rest of the changing room. Great. Next to him Hitachi isn't laughing anymore, rather he's looking at Kaminari in a way that doesn't promise much good. Before Izuku can muster the courage to answer, a cold voice cuts through the room. It's rude to ask about other people's scars. Todoroki, who's standing in the corner of the room, is looking at Kaminari with such annoyance and cold disdain that the other teen pales a little. Sorry, he apologizes to Izuku with a bow, I shouldn't have asked. The entire room stays quiet until Bakugo growls, well. What are you all looking at, extras? In a flurry of movements everyone turns to do their own thing again. Izuku breathes a sigh of relief. Crisis averted. He tries to catch Todoroki's eyes to thank him, but the teen has turned around again to do his own thing. You okay? Hitachi murmurs next to him. Izuku looks at him and swallows, yeah I am. Because weirdly enough people had stood up for him. Something that's a new concept to him. Maybe, just maybe, UA won't be as bad as middle school. After that Izuku quickly shoves himself into his costume and hurries out of the changing room. All those eyes trying to sneakily glance at him don't really help, especially because it's so obvious. Today we'll be doing mock battles inside this building of 2 vs 2. The entire class is lined up before All Might at practice ground beta, all of them with their new uniforms on. All Might is standing in front of them with his way too bright smile and a set of not so well hidden flashcards. As it appears they'll be doing a battle exercise for the first lesson. Without discussing the safety procedures. Did the man even get a teaching license? In the meantime the hero himself continues with his struggle in teaching. We will make a villain team, they'll have a bomb hidden in the building. The hero team will enter after a set period of time. They can win by either restraining the other team with a given tape or by touching the bomb before the timer goes off. The man gives the class another smile as if that made everything clear. Internally Izuku sighs, he hadn't given any details about potential moves that could disqualify you. That's without even mentioning the fact that most of this class probably didn't even know how to throw a punch or fall correctly or how to do the proper footwork. Something that's second nature to more experienced fighters but which is of vital importance to the basis of learning any fight style. All Might looks around the class and doesn't seem to notice the vague looks he's being sent. Alright, that's all. Let me draw the lots to decide the teams. After a bit all the names are collected in one big bin and the hero begins making the teams. Asui and Tokoyami Team H, the villains. Against Zero and Koda Team F, the heroes. Iida Tenya and Bakugo Katsuki Team D, the heroes. All Might takes out another paper and unfolds it. Izuku knows what's going to be on it the second before he reads it out loud. Uraraka Achako and Midoriya Izuku Team A, the villains. Immediately Izuku's eyes are drawn to Bakugo. The other teen also looks at him and then grins. It's a grin with a dangerous and wild edge. A challenge. Izuku's not one to back down from that and gives him a cold smile, one that he knows had scared other villains so much they surrendered without a fight. Bakugo though, he doesn't back down so easily and keeps a steady gaze without breaking eye contact. Next to him Hitachi nudges his shoulder. Luck's really on your side today, huh? Izuku scoffs, yeah it really seems so. Uraraka finds him standing in the corner of the observation room, looking at the multiple screens displaying the practice ground. The first group had just gone to prepare for their exercise and the rest of the class went off to this room to look at the upcoming battle. Some duos are huddled together somewhere in the room, talking through some tactics together. Others chose to first observe the first battle. Then there are the unlucky few whose teamwork isn't going so smoothly. Like Todoroki and Zero, where the ice user almost seems to be made out of stone as he continues ignoring Zero's attempt at devising a plan. Or Iida and Bakugo for that matter, where the latter just growls a few commands at the blue-haired teen, while Iida splutters and in his own way attempts to make plans. "So, we're a team, huh?" Uraraka says as she comes to stand next to him. Izuku just nods as his eyes keep roaming the room, scanning for any details that he could use to his advantage. "I think I have a plan." He continues more quietly, "I think you should be the one to guard the bomb, then I'll be in the field." The other girl nods in agreement and her hair bobs up and down. "Any ideas about what to do with the bomb?" "The building has multiple levels, that's even clear without the floor plan we'll probably be given just before our match. Your quirk is perfect all the way on the roof because you won't have to worry about falling off and such. That's where you'll have the advantage, so that's where we'll put the bomb." Iida, "He'll have difficulty navigating on the roof because I don't think it'll have a fence around it so he'll have to be careful. Bakugo will most definitely come after me so you won't have to worry about him." Izuku pauses his thought process and realizes that he might have been talking too much. Talking about something has always helped to organize his thoughts, and it's a habit he hadn't been able to completely break, though the habit appears much less now than when he was younger. When he glances at Uraraka though, he sees that she's listening intently and shows no sign of irritation at his abundant talking. "Do you have any skill sets besides your quirk?" Izuku wonders, more to himself than to Uraraka. Still, the girl answers, "My parents have a contracting company, I have always helped them out so I guess I'm quite handy with building stuff." Izuku lights up from that bit of information. "That makes the roof even more perfect. If you can gather up some building material like wood and metal and stuff from the other levels of the building and float it up to the roof, you might be able to build something around the bomb." "I can do that," the other girl says, and she continues thoughtfully with her hand underneath her chin. "I think I can also do something like making a trap, but I'll have to see." "What should I do about Iida?" Izuku shakes his head, "Don't worry about him, I'll take care of that on the field." He gives Uraraka a small smile, "You just focus on our defense." Uraraka's eyes glint with determination and she grins rather wolfish. Aye, Captain, let's show these boys what we can do." When it's their turn to go, Izuku and Uraraka make their way to ground beta. On their way Izuku quickly memorizes the floor plan and then takes his time to give his teammate some final advice. He shows her how to throw a punch and how to put down her feet. She likely won't do it right the first few times, and it's probably too difficult to use in the heat of the fight, but nonetheless he hopes it will do some good. At the stairs of the building they part with Izuku's final words, "Just remember that we're the villains. We can act like them as well." Uraraka pauses and she seems to think the words over. Then she nods at him with a look on her face that tells him that she understood its meaning. Once Izuku's left alone on the ground floor he takes a careful look around. At the windows, the entrance door, the stairway and its blind spots and the air shafts. He knows the floor plan is the same for every floor, but mirrored with a stairway each time at the end of a long straight hall. Based on Izuku's calculations about their opponents he can guess where they'll enter, and coupled with the information about the building a plan forms in his head. The test is about to start any minute now with the heroes on their way. Izuku's hidden in the shadows of one of the rooms on the ground floor. Calmly, he lets a sense of focus fall on him. The kind of razor focus that always accompanies him in his fights. This time though, he lets the brakes that he'd always been so careful of keeping on a bit loose. Apparently the universe wants him to be a villain so badly he's even been assigned the role in a hero school. Well, Izuku will play along. With his hearing quirks he already hears Bakugo and Iida approaching, the latter while still trying to reason with the blonde. In one swift motion Izuku has pulled on his hood, enveloping his face in darkness and shadows. He presses himself to the wall and becomes one with the shadows. Merely a ghost in a dark room. A few seconds there's only silence and Izuku's slowed quiet breathing. Then it's literally shattered by Bakugo who rockets himself in the air through a window on the second floor. Iida though, that's a whole other story. Even with all his naivety and rigidness the teen still chooses to just walk through the front door. Internally, Izuku sighs. It's exactly what he'd predicted. He hears the teen's footsteps nearing and checking the few rooms before Izuku's while talking loudly in his earpiece, probably to argue with Bakugo. Really, had he learned nothing from his brother? The footsteps stop in front of Izuku's room as if hesitating. In that time his muscles tense and Izuku can start to feel the adrenaline of an upcoming fight pumping through his veins. With a slow arc the door opens and a tall shadow appears on the floor. In the dark against the wall next to the door, Izuku waits as a predator on his prey. Then Iida walks into the room and for half a second has the time to look around. In one movement Izuku's standing behind Iida. In the next breath he has drawn a knife and locked the teen's limbs in such a way that he won't be able to move out of Izuku's grip no matter what. The knife stops in the air just a centimeter removed from Iida's neck. Underneath his hand Izuku can feel the other boy's rapid beating of his heart. A strangled noise escapes from his throat. Technically Iida would have died right here, wouldn't he? Somewhere in the back of his mind Izuku registers that his voice has taken a cold edge. Yeah, I suppose so, young Midoriya. Which means Iida would be disqualified, right? Underneath his grip Izuku can feel Iida try to shift nervously. Through his earpiece Izuku can hear All Might struggling to find words before answering, yes, Iida is hereby disqualified. Hearing those words Izuku draws back his knife in one swift motion and backs away from Iida a little. The other teen visibly sags in relief. He'd been lucky Izuku had left the knife in its leather sheath. Without wasting much time standing around Izuku moves out of the room, his footsteps quiet as a mouse. He leaves Iida behind, who seems to be in some sort of shock. Izuku doesn't spend any time thinking that over, he's a villain now and he has a job to do. As he makes his way to the stairs he lets Uraraka in on the situation. Iida is down. Great, how about Bakugo? Just then an angry shout travels down the stairway from up above. Izuku can't help the smirk that forms on his face. It seems your traps are working. Uraraka had left a few simple traps on each level. They're easy enough to avoid for the trained eye, but if you don't expect them they still give you a nasty surprise. I'm engaging now. Keep vigilant. Over and out. Alright, good luck. Over and out. The silence that follows envelopes Izuku and he lets it carry him up the stairs into the quiet hallways of the second floor. Bakugo must have gone up one floor then. To check, Izuku closes his eyes and lets his own quirk scan the building. Up on the roof, Uraraka is pacing around, maybe even still building some things around the bomb. But just one floor above Izuku, in the corner left room, there's Bakugo's trademark blazing quirk, pounding around the room with brutal efficiency. Probably to look for Izuku. As he sets his first steps onto the third floor he hears Bakugo's footsteps somewhere to his right. Izuku knows the teen is smart, he might have already figured out that Izuku's around here somewhere. There's one door in the entire hallway that's standing open just a little bit. Izuku approaches it silently and peeks around the corner. Indeed, the blonde is there. The quick and silent approach to this, that's what Izuku's going for. Without making a sound he opens the door and slips into the room. He's been trained for this after all. For these silent takedowns. It's handy if you can come in and out somewhere without being noticed. Especially if you exit the place with another quirk in your pocket. Without wasting another second he dashes towards Bakugo, his hands already moving in position to do the same maneuver as with Iida. He never touches the teen though, because when he's a breath away Bakugo turns around on pure instinct with blazing eyes and burning hands. An explosion rockets the room and Izuku barely manages to roll to the side and evade the worst of the blast. Quickly, he gets on his feet again and comes face to face with the other teen. Bakugo grins when he sees who's standing in front of him. Fucking finally. Izuku doesn't have time to respond because then the blonde is in his face blasting explosions left and right. He evades them without much difficulty and creates some distance between the two of them again. Bakugo, also barely winded, stretches his hands at his sides as he says, I know I've met you before. It's said with such confidence that it makes Izuku's insides turn cold. He doesn't show any of that though and instead replies coolly, I thought we'd already come to the conclusion yesterday that wasn't the case. Don't bullshit me. I know I'm right. Instead of answering, Izuku engages again. He'll get a read on Bakugo's fighting abilities before coming up with a new plan to subdue him. He swings his right hand at Bakugo's face as a decoy while trying to wipe the other teen off his feet with one of his legs. A second before Izuku's leg connects with Bakugo's body the teen seems to sense his plan and with a short blast from both of his hands, he moves to the side to evade the swipe of a leg. Who's Tenko, huh? Bakugo grunts as he tries to blow Izuku's insides out with a blast of his hand. On instinct his body moves to the side and Izuku manages to get 2 hits in by the boy who receives them with bared teeth. In Izuku's head though, there's only silence. Tenko. The name brings forth memories he'd rather forget, together with a sense of longing. Longing to a brotherly figure he'd once had, no matter how sick their relationship had been. For just a second when he looks at the place where Bakugo had been standing he doesn't see the hot-headed teen. No, he sees that thing. Its hulking figure with its rolling muscles, he hears it screeching in his ears and smells the faint smell of rotting flesh. When he blinks the image is gone again and in its place stands Bakugo again. Even if his mouth feels as dry as sand he forces himself to say, I don't know who you're talking about. As a reaction Bakugo goes at Izuku with a much bigger explosion than before and even if he evades it, he feels it singe his eyebrows. Fucking liar. You know who that Tenko fucker is. Again the raging teen is replaced by the image of that thing. And even if it's just for a second, Izuku knows he has to get out of this fight. He has to create some distance and organize his thoughts again, get a grip on his treacherous brain and its memories. Instead of answering Bakugo by either words or another fight maneuver his hand goes to the red utility belt. In one of the pouches he finds what he's looking for, something that he'd requested the support department to make. He takes out a tiny gray ball, and Bakugo frowns at the thing. What the? Before he can continue, Izuku throws the little ball on the floor with as much force as he can muster. It hits the floor, and immediately the room fills with thick gray gas. Izuku dashes out a door to his right that leads to the next room, and as he does so he hears an enraged shout before it's cut off by violent coughing. The little balls he had requested produce enough gas to fill an entire room. A perfect distraction. The gas isn't harmful in any way, but it can make someone cough when they inhale a lot. Swiftly and silently Izuku rushes through room after room, opening and closing doors at random. Bakugo will find him at some point, but at least he can make it difficult for the boy. In a room that's filled to the brim with walls of cardboard boxes, Izuku halts his steps. It's a maze. His mind goes through the options he has. He could either go up one story, the obvious move, but that would take more time and he'd have to move through an empty hallway without any coverage. He could keep leading Bakugo around, but the thought of doing so doesn't really appeal to him. It's not his style, too passive. Or he could lay an ambush. His eyes scan the room in front of him. Rows and rows of cardboard boxes. Dark corners and a door that opens into the room in such a way that it gives Izuku enough time to act. Yes, that's what he'll do. Midoriya. Hello. Do you copy? Uraraka's voice, filled with a note of panic, sounds through his earpiece. Quietly, Izuku answers as he begins putting his plan into motion. I copy. A relieved sigh. Great, the explosion stopped and I thought the girl trails off as if not knowing what to say. While moving a few boxes Izuku says, don't worry about it. I'm working on it. How's everything up there? Just doing my thing. Nothing special. Good. Keep doing that. Let me handle Bakugo. Over. Good luck. Over. Izuku cuts contact and lays the final hand to his plan. At the same time he senses Bakugo's quirk approaching his room with deadly speed. A few seconds before the boy reaches the room, Izuku hides behind a few boxes. His heart hammers in his chest as he crouches behind a tower of boxes and he tries to calm his rapid breathing. The memories that threaten to overwhelm him he drags back into a deep dark place in his brain. To a place even deeper than where they'd been before they started to try to resurface. The door opens with a burst and Bakugo comes storming in. Izuku doesn't see anything from behind his box, but that's also not necessary. His quirk does the job for him and locates the burning quirk with that familiar sense of wanting to take Dot. Are you that much of a pussy that you won't fight me? Bakugo shouts, explosions popping to accompany his words. Izuku doesn't answer, instead he grabs the tiny, almost invisible threads in his hands a little tighter. Just a bit closer. Dot. Fucking answer me. I know you're in here. The teen takes a few more steps forward. That's all Izuku needs. With all his strength he pulls at one of the threads in his hands. With a crash a row of boxes comes falling down. Before Bakugo had burst into the room Izuku had come up with a plan. Tie a few almost invisible threads to some of the boxes all the way at the bottom of the towers. The threads had also been a part of the things included in his belt. They were meant for a different purpose, like laying traps to trip people up, but Izuku's always been one to think outside the box. If he pulls the threads a tower of boxes will fall down. Izuku has to suppress a grin when Bakugo furiously stomps towards the place where the boxes had fallen. Where are you, huh? Too scared to face me head on? Another 2 threads are pulled, making more rows of boxes fall. See, Izuku wasn't sitting inside the maze of boxes. No, he was sitting behind the single wall of boxes on the other side of the room. Next to the door. Bakugo had missed them because the door swung open to the inside, concealing the boxes. The other teen blows numerous boxes into bits and Izuku even sees a few cardboard pieces hit the wall next to him. He pulls his 4th and final thread and it brings down the tower all the way at the back. As domino pieces the biggest number of boxes yet comes falling down. Now. While Bakugo has his back completely turned to the place where Izuku is sitting, probably busy trying to determine how these boxes keep falling down, Izuku himself rushes forward. Or that's what he would have done if it weren't for the next words the explosive teen would say. Still not showing yourself? Afraid they are going to take you? The words register in his brain and Izuku can't help himself, he stays rooted in his place. His heartbeat picks up without his consent and he can feel sweat forming on his hands. Alerted by his footsteps Bakugo turns around. Only it isn't Bakugo, it's that thing. His blood thunders in his ears and even if he knows that it isn't real, on instinct he still pulls more quirks to the front. That thing. No, Bakugo moves a step forward and that is all Izuku needs. With adrenaline rushing through his veins and his heart thundering in his throat, he moves with all the speed he has at the thing. He tackles it to the ground, in the middle of a pile of boxes, and begins hitting it. In the stomach, its arms, its face. Somewhere far away he registers a burning sensation on his arms and abdomen. He also faintly notices a voice booming in his ears, telling them to stop. Maybe it's All Might. He wonders why the hero won't do anything about the monster in the room. Maybe they have come to take him after all. Maybe this morning was just a scout around the area. A thought enters his mind as his panic comes to a high. I have to end this. By pure habit he activates a quirk. The quirk he's had for the longest. He'll aim at the brain. Like he's always done. His hand moves away and up, ready to strike. Suddenly his nose explodes in a myriad of pain. Tears fill his eyes and he has to blink them away. When his vision clears again, it's not that thing laying on the ground. No, it's Bakugo. Izuku realizes what has just happened and the panic inside of him doesn't recede, it merely focuses around a different problem. Bakugo isn't looking at Izuku's face though, instead he's looking at Izuku's right hand with wide open eyes. Izuku follows his gaze and for a moment can only stare. His hand is raised above the other teen's head and it's glowing red hot. Magma hand. Then the blonde's eyes track back to Izuku's face and he realizes that it's because of his eyes. They're probably glowing a vivid green, like they always do when he uses his quirk. For a few seconds glowing green meets burning red. Boys, if you don't stop this violent fighting I will have to disqualify you both. All Might's urgent voice. They both snap out of the trance-like state and in a flash, Izuku has dragged back all his quirks into their respective saves. The redness in his hand recedes and the glowing in his eyes stops. At the same time Bakugo starts to struggle against Izuku's grip on him. Izuku's got him firmly pinned against the ground though, and there's no breaking free from his death grip. The same knife he'd used against Iida, Izuku draws again, laying it calmly against the other's hot skin. Technically Bakugo is down now as well. His voice sounds raw in his ears. Yes, Bakugo is out of the game. Though I would advise you both to be more careful next time. All Might begins announcing the villain's victory, but Izuku doesn't pay that any mind. As he pushes himself away from Bakugo, the teen keeps looking at him. He has a black eye and a broken nose. Going by the sting in his own nose, Izuku probably has that same injury. The blonde doesn't say a word, but when Izuku looks into those red eyes he realizes one terrible thing. Bakugo knows who he is and he's not going to let that go. Recovery Girl isn't the slightest bit happy when she sees Izuku for the second time in her infirmary that day, with his nose broken and some minor burns. Neither is she happy to see Bakugo with a blue face and bruises scattered across his body. But the disapproving face she gives each of them beds each at the other side of the long room, as if she can sense the tension between them and heals them as much as she can. Both of them are left with a bruised nose, though it's not broken anymore. The rest of their injuries are healed. Izuku undergoes all of it with gritted teeth. He still feels shaken by the fight, or rather its ending, and with each touch by the woman he has to keep his body from tensing. His hands won't stop shaking, and the heroine notices. With a face that's softer than usual, she puts down a weighted blanket at the end of his bed and gives him a few extra sweets. Grateful, Izuku puts the blanket around his shoulders, its weight grounding him. As he's supposed to stay here for at least another hour to rest before he's allowed to leave, Izuku is just deciding how to spend his time when a visitor appears at his bed. Hitachi. At the sight of his friend, Izuku feels some of the tension in his body unravel. The slow pulsing purple quirk is like a calming rhythm. His friend looks at him with a sense of concern. Hi. His throat feels dry and he tries to swallow it away. It doesn't work and his eyes move to the water bottle standing on the side table next to his bed. Hitachi follows his gaze and wordlessly hands him the bottle. Izuku only realizes how thirsty he is once he's gulped down half the bottle. Thanks. He says and Hitachi nods. How are you? Izuku tries to find the words. Is he fine? No. But he's content now that his friend is here, next to him. This fight hadn't been the worst by far. He'll get over it. But it's the fact that Bakugo knows that keeps his mind busy. Hitachi seems to understand though, because he hums. Did you win? Izuku asks as he feels the shaking in his hands calm down. His friend grins and his eyes light up with rare true excitement. Hell yeah. The heroes won. You should have seen the villains' faces when they realized what my quirk was. Izuku feels the corners of his mouth turn up. Nice. I wish I could have seen it. Those words make his friend frown slightly. What happened down there? Izuku pauses and hesitates. Bakugo, he riled me up. I think I lost control. It's probably my own fault. It's not. Hitachi looks in the direction where Bakugo's bed is, all the way at the end of the room. He frowns again, only this time Izuku notices the anger in his eyes. If you don't want to tell him something, he should respect that. The fact that Izuku has never told Hitachi anything hangs as a thick truth between them. Izuku sighs and looks away, down at his hands. I do want to tell you about me. I just can't. I could put you in danger. His friend swallows and also looks down. I know. and it's fine. You should take your time. Izuku is about to express the immense sense of relief he feels hearing those words when his quirk alerts him of another presence approaching. A presence impossible to ignore. 2 feet stop in front of the closed curtain around Izuku's bed. Young Midoriya. Could I have a word with you? Izuku and Hitachi give each other a look. His friend says, I'll see you tomorrow. He turns around to leave the bed area when Izuku stops him. Hitachi. His friend halts and looks at him. Yeah. Thanks. A simple word but with so many meanings. Hitachi gives him a smile and nods before he leaves. He understands. Izuku props himself up a bit higher and straightens his back when a second person enters through the curtains. All might. This afternoon's patrol had been a rather boring one so far. Shouta crouches on a roof of one of the taller buildings of the area and looks out over the city. Every once in a while he has to do a patrol in broad daylight, or rather during the twilight hours of the day. The sun, already on its descent, gives the city a golden glow. The reason for his early patrol is currently somewhere inside the building across the street. The building is just a big concrete box with some windows at the front and a huge advertising board telling everyone in the near vicinity that this is a gym. The blue paint on the outer wall and neon orange paint on the window edges severely needs a repaint, still it draws your attention like a lighthouse at sea on a dark night. The entrance doors swing open and Shouta zeroes in on the blonde man exiting the place with quick steps. Odd. Shouta's been tailing Sugiyama Takeo for almost 3 weeks now, and up till now he hasn't discovered anything that would cause suspicion. The man has a set schedule, one of his things is to always visit this gym on Tuesday at 3:30. He usually leaves an hour later and then goes on his merry way home or to a bar. This time though, instead of turning left when he exits the gym, the man turns right and starts rushing down the street towards the station. Without wasting another second, Shouta gets up from his position and swings his capture weapon out to the next building. Maybe today will finally be the day of a breakthrough in the case. Shouta follows the man all the way until the station where Sugiyama swipes his card to get past the gates of the building. Before doing so he quickly looks around, as if to check if he's being followed. He doesn't see Shouta, who's perched on a building. Everyone always forgets to look up. When the man disappears into the mass of people hurrying to and from the station, Shouta quickly swings down and nonchalantly starts making his way towards the same gates. While doing so he wraps his capture weapon in such a way around his neck that it seems like a normal scarf. Just an average hobo who's cold and on his way to take the train. Past the gates it's easy to find the man again. With his hideous blouse that this time has a flower pattern on it, Sugiyama doesn't exactly blend in. Shouta follows the man while keeping enough distance, it's rush hour so blending into the crowd isn't all too difficult. Once Sugiyama reaches the platform there's already a train waiting and he rushes inside. Shouta does the same, only one cabin to the left. A few seconds later the doors close and the train starts moving. Shouta pushes his way past a few people to stand next to the door that leads to the next train cabin with Sugiyama in it. One glance through the glass tells him that the man is sitting on one of the seats with his leg nervously bouncing up and down. For good while they sit in the train while it stops at multiple stations and people enter and leave the train. Shouta is just starting to wonder where the hell Sugiyama is going when the man gets up and pushes his way past a few people to get out. The train stops again and Shouta also hurries to exit the cabin. Once on the platform his eyes fall on the name of the station. Kamino Central. He follows Sugiyama out of the station onto the busy streets of the big city. While they were on the train the sun had gone down and street poles, flashy advertisement boards and the many shops that line the streets light up the city. Sugiyama rushes past all of it without sparing a second glance. After the man has walked for 2 minutes he dashes into a side alley and disappears from Shouta's view. Instead of following him into the alley by foot, Shouta hurries to another alley, grabs the end of his capture weapon and swings himself onto the roof of the nearest building. With a few controlled swings and some parkour Shouta manages to get to the alley that Sugiyama had ducked into. Of course the man is no longer there. Shouta doesn't let that deter him and swings to the next building, where he'll have a better view of the maze of alleys that stretches out in front of him. There he easily finds the man again, he's stopped in the middle of a seemingly random alley. Shouta doesn't waste a second and begins to swing his way towards the alley. Before he reaches the place a second man seems to step out of the shadows. Shouta lands on top of the building that looks out over the alley without making a sound. Careful to not be seen he glances into the alley. Sugiyama is standing in front of the other man. He's more nervous than Shouta has seen him in the past 3 weeks, and that sleazy attitude of his also seems to have disappeared. On the other hand, the other man has an air of confidence and annoyance around him. He's at least 2 heads taller than Sugiyama with bronzed skin and black hair that's tied into a low ponytail and reaches all the way down his back. Muscles bulge underneath the leather jacket the man is wearing. Shouta trusts his instincts and right now they're telling him that this man is dangerous. "You're late," the man says with a low voice. Sugiyama smiles apologetically. "I hadn't realized our meeting place had changed." The man clicks his tongue in annoyance. "Do you have the money?" Sugiyama asks, his eyes looking at the man with a sort of hunger. Without saying a word and a sort of disgust on his face at Sugiyama's eagerness, the man throws an envelope at the blonde's feet. Sugiyama grabs the thing like a dog would jump at a bone. He opens the envelope with fast uncontrolled movements and starts counting what is probably money. His mouth moves without making a sound while counting, then he stops. This Sugiyama looks up in disbelief, it's not even half. The man spits on the ground near Sugiyama's feet. "Be happy that you get anything at all after your mistake with those fucking detectives." Sugiyama visibly recoils. Look, didn't he tries to stammer, but the man interrupts him. "Don't bother coming next time you fuck up." He stretches his hands at his sides and Sugiyama's face pales hearing the following words. "You wouldn't want to end up like all the other people who have disappointed us, now would you?" Sugiyama feverishly shakes his head. "And no. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." The man smiles and for a second Shouta can't see the charisma behind that smile. "Good." His face morphs back into a frown. "We need more candidates for our upcoming projects." "Of course, I will send them to you." Sugiyama answers hesitantly. The other man seems satisfied with that answer and promptly turns around and walks away. Shouta could have sworn that he'd spared a glance at the exact place where Shouta is hiding before the man disappeared into the shadows of the many alleys. Sugiyama heaves a sigh of relief when he seems to be sure that the man is gone and then also leaves the alley. Shouta does the same, silently, like he'd never even been there. This has given him enough material to think about. In his pocket he feels the weight of his phone. He'd taken a few pictures and recorded the conversation so they could be analyzed by the police. And of course by Ghost. They'll meet the coming weekend after Shouta's had the trip with his class to the USJ. There will be enough time then to look at all of these new leads. Teaching is a lot harder than it seems. That's something Toshinori has realized after his first official day of teaching. Especially when you always have a clock ticking in the back of your head, reminding you of how much time you have left with your quirk. Even the teaching course Nedzu had made him take last holiday couldn't have prepared him for this. The second years that he'd taught this morning had misled him. He'd given them a simple exercise and they'd done it without much trouble. So, when in the afternoon he'd walked up to the front of one of the first-year hero classes, he'd done it with some confidence. He'd explained a simple exercise to them and had expected it to go just as well as in the morning. Well, let's just say he was wrong. The first group had gone okay enough. No, it's the group that had gone after that had gone horribly wrong. Specifically two students. Midoriya and Bakugo. He'd first noticed Midoriya during the entrance exam. His heroic heart giving a helping hand to anyone who noticed it. Toshinori had right then and there almost made the decision. Midoriya had appeared to be the perfect successor. But something had made him hesitate. Maybe it was the fact that Midoriya's quirk was so close to the quirk of a man he'd defeated 5 years ago. Still, the boy had been in the back of his head to become a potential successor, and Toshinori had felt some anticipation at seeing what Midoriya would do in the battle exercise. He hadn't expected that golden heart to freeze over and for there to stand a completely different person. At first Toshinori had let it slide with Iida. Midoriya was supposed to play the villain, it would make sense for him to play that role then as well. Even if it had taken him by surprise. No, it was somewhere during the fight when Midoriya and Bakugo clashed that something had seemed to shift in Midoriya's approach to the fight. Toshinori has been a pro hero for longer than most. He can recognize when a move is intended to bring serious harm. When Midoriya charged at Bakugo in that room full of boxes, Toshinori had recognized the intent to bring irrevocable harm in those movements, and his heart had lurched a little. He'd practically shouted through his earpiece at them to stop, but neither of the two teams responsible had listened to him or heard his words. Somewhere in that next minute, during which both boys beat each other up, the two of them had stopped all of a sudden. Toshinori had shouted his final warning before he would have intervened himself, and the boys, who had been staring at each other for a good few seconds, luckily stopped their fight. Midoriya won. His behavior seemed to have changed again at the end, and the beast that had been inside his body before seemed to have curled itself up somewhere deep down. The blood streaming down from his broken nose hadn't seemed to bother him as he calmly laid a sheathed knife against Bakugo's throat and claimed the villain's victory. Now Toshinori is standing in front of the blue curtains that obscure one of the troublemakers from his sight. The faint voices that he'd heard as he was making his way across the room had stopped. "Young Midoriya. Could I have a word with you?" Behind the curtain a few words are said. Private ones, and Toshinori blocks them out. They're none of his business. Then the curtains slide open and Shinsu slips out. The kid gives Toshinori one skeptical glance before hurrying out the room. Toshinori decides to ignore the odd reaction and opens the curtains a bit further to take a step forward. "All might." Cold word said by Midoriya. The boy is sitting upright with his shoulders squared and a plain face that betrays nothing. Toshinori doesn't let the attitude faze him and says, "I wanted to talk with you about your fight this afternoon." The teen doesn't react, he only keeps looking at the hero with those dull yet sharp green eyes. Maybe the boy is just tired after the fight, so Toshinori continues, "I must say that I hadn't expected your behavior." "Why not?" Midoriya asks with a tilt of his head. The words come out with a sharp edge. Still, they're utterly curious. As if the teen truly doesn't understand what he did wrong. "You fought rather aggressively." The boy frowns at him. "I was assigned the villain role." Toshinori shakes his head and he feels a sense of disbelief. Did he truly not understand where he went wrong? "Midoriya, my boy." Midoriya's frame suddenly tenses, "Don't call me that." Something like indignation boils up inside Toshinori when he hears the boy commanding him, and he frowns, "You should understand that I won't tolerate your actions the next time. No matter if you're playing a villain, we're still in a hero school. The way you and Bakugo fought at the end is not worthy of a hero. At his words, Midoriya's face morphs into disbelief. "But I did what was expected of me. I will bring this to Principal Nedzu the next time that it happens." Toshinori says a bit harsher. The boy has to understand that his actions can be dangerous. For his own safety and that of his classmates. The teen's jaw clenches, but he nods. When Toshinori leaves, he does it with some disappointment. Maybe the little voice in the back of his head that keeps whispering he could be your successor is wrong. He's not sure what to think of Midoriya, but him as a successor. No, he needs someone with a golden heart and a good moral compass. And Midoriya doesn't have the last, that's become clear after today. All Might has that same conversation with Bakugo. That one also isn't very successful. Much to Izuku's relief, the hero leaves soon after, and his quirk calms down once the blinding presence that is the number one's quirk has left the room. After his conversation with All Might, Izuku doesn't exactly think much better of the hero. Rather, he feels angry when he thinks back to the words said by the hero. It's unfair that he would be punished because he just plays his role well. It reminds him of the times in middle school when he would be sent to the principal's office just because of words said by other students. The time that he has to rest ticks by unbelievably slow, and it gives him too much alone time with his thoughts. He wonders if anyone besides Bakugo saw him using another quirk in the end. Hopefully not, though neither Hitachi nor All Might had mentioned anything regarding that, so Izuku might have been lucky with that. Once the hour is almost over, Recovery Girl first checks Bakugo one last time, and then the teen is allowed to leave. Next up, she checks Izuku and also lets him leave once she's made him promise that he'll be careful with his still healing nose. The halls are quiet, most students have already gone home as this is only the first day of classes and there isn't much work to do yet. Izuku's steps echo down the long hallways and it kind of feels like he's got the school to himself. Like the universe has allowed him this quiet, peaceful moment in the school of his dreams after the chaos that was the rest of his day. He enjoys the sound of his footsteps echoing against the walls, he's allowed them to make some noise this time, and the sound is like the blissful rainfall after a hot day. He admires the walls, the windows, the floors, everything, and lets himself realize that this is his school. The fatigue that weighs heavily on his bones and his mind after a stressful day lets up a little, and something like a giddy happiness replaces it. A small but genuine smile stretches across Izuku's face, and some golden afternoon sun rays peek through the massive clouds and caress his hair as if they can sense his happiness. That feeling accompanies him all the way towards the exit of the building, down to the gate. Or rather what is left of it. Two minor heroes are standing near the entrance, guarding the place as a big truck is unloaded with an exact replica of the impenetrable gate. His smile is slowly wiped from his face when he notices Bakugo waiting just past the gate. As he leaves school grounds, Izuku keeps walking and unfortunately the other teen follows. Izuku leads them into an alley with a dead end, somewhere where there's the least chance anyone will hear them. There he stops and turns around with a sigh, his good mood ruined. "What do you want this time?" "Another round. Because you should, now that Recovery Girl will lynch us if she finds out." Bakugo also halts with a good distance still between them. For a while he doesn't answer, he only keeps looking at Izuku with a taxing gaze. Izuku stares back with a sense of annoyance, all while the other teen still hasn't said a word. He has just opened his mouth to tell the blonde that not answering isn't all that polite when the other teen breaks the silence. "You're Deku." Izuku's heart skips a beat, but he manages to keep his face expressionless. "And what if I was? I remember you. We were best friends." There's some sort of emotion behind those words, and Bakugo's usual blazing eyes seem to soften just a little. A small slither of hope blooms up inside Izuku's chest at those words. He isn't the only one who remembers. Maybe if the blonde also remembers they could. Izuku doesn't finish that train of thought, instead he forces himself to say, "What gave me away?" "Magma hand." Bakugo's eyes stray to the other boy's hands, as if expecting them to glow red hot again. Following his gaze, Izuku stuffs his hands in his pockets. The distant day where Izuku had shown him his new quirk hangs like a barrier between them. It's the one day where Izuku's life officially took a turn for the worse, even if he didn't know that at the time. He swallows with difficulty and softly says, "I also remember you, Kakin." The name tastes weird on his tongue, like a muscle that he hasn't used in a long time. The muscle memory is still there, but an active memory of when he'd last used it is gone. For just a second something like surprise flits across Bakugo's face, then he frowns. What the hell happened? Izuku shrugs. Small explosions echo through the alley. No, you fucking don't. The blonde growls as he takes a few steps forward and points at Izuku with an accusing finger, you just suddenly disappeared. Without saying a word. Why? Izuku presses his lips together and lightly shakes his head. You don't want to know. The fuck I do. My mom cried for 3 months after you and your mom disappeared. She refused to tell me why, and after those 3 months she never talked about you again. Like you'd never existed. The anger in Bakugo's voice changes into something more vulnerable, and Izuku feels a stab of guilt. Still, he grits his teeth and says a bit more harshly, like I said. You don't want to know. Bakugo's face contorts into anger, and he clenches his hands into fists, as if trying to contain the explosions that threaten to escape. Bullshit. Was it that dad of yours? Did he make you cut off contact? Soft white curls and a loving smile just for him. A slight smell of smoke with each of his father's warm hugs. A tensing frame and a hallway engulfed in flames. The memories leave behind a hurting ache when Izuku blinks them away. A sort of trembling fury takes a hold of him, but he suppresses the feeling. No. Then why the fuck did you leave? A challenge. Izuku is having none of it and loses the reins on his emotions. He's tired after a long day and his patience has been used up. He stalks forward into Bakugo's equally furious face and hisses, don't dig into my past. It will not end well for you. I've given you everything I could and will ever give to you. He pushes past the blonde and stalks towards the exit of the alley. Just before leaving he turns around and gives the other teen a final warning. My past is filled with ghosts, Bakugo. Don't try to wake them. Thanks for watching guys, that's it for today, so hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget check out our author of this fanfic, link and details in description.